have Robert and Kosha here. It's such an honor to have you here to share your testimony. I find it so interesting to hear everyone's personal encounter with God because they're all so uniquely different.
Yeah.
And you never know if for someone who's listening to this, you never know what really resonates with them, because everyone's journey is so unique.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost like we very rarely talk about it, because
And I think it's so important that we do share our stories in
I
a
love
way.
it,
And
yeah.
in like the New Testament, you see how it was a testimony of the saints that like inspired and converted a lot of people. It was those personal experiences as opposed to like a textbook here. This is what happened. It's like this is my story.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was raised in Texas, in Fort Worth, Texas, and my family's like I'm fifth generation Texan, so they've been there a long, long time, And my ancestors were English, Irish, Scottish, and you could say German or Frisian. My last name is Fries. It's this part of northwest Germany and Holland called Friesland. But anyway, I grew up in Fort Worth, and my dad was a water engineer. His dad was a water engineer. And they had built up this company and, had done well for themselves after, generations of basically, the American dream kind of thing,
What is a water engineer?
Well, basically my grandfather and he was born in 1900, and Texas at that time was sort of on this transition of going from little towns to cities, basically. And in order to go from a town to a city, you had to have clean water, you had to have sanitation, you had to have water supply in Texas, which is a dry, in many places, state, and so he kind of did a lot of ahead of his time kind of stuff around flood control, dams, pipelines, sewage treatment, all this kind of stuff, which sort of made it possible for all these cities to develop in the state that wouldn't have been able to otherwise, or not to the extent that they did, and so and he worked from until he died when he was 90, basically. I mean, he was a workaholic, to be honest. That's part of my story, really. So anyway, by the time I was born, we had it pretty good. It was a pretty comfortable life. I grew up going to a nice school, living in a nice house in a nice neighborhood, and I worked starting in high school, but between growing up until high school, I didn't have to do much at all except go to school and just play and hang out. That was life. I have a twin brother, I have an older sister, and that was reality. But I think junior high school, getting into high school, my parents' relationship wasn't great. Eventually, they separated, they divorced, and there was while there was a lot of material prosperity, I'd say there wasn't much emotional or spiritual prosperity. Is what I felt growing up. And I was hungry for something. I was looking for something. And when their marriage was breaking down, and I was like a freshman, sophomore in high school, I was looking for something. I think I was always looking for something, but I was also looking to numb out a bit as well at that point because it was just too, kind of upsetting for me. So I was drinking, smoking weed, started doing acid, and so part of it was trying to numb out, but part of it was also I was searching for something. Like my parents, my mother at least, was of an age where she could have been a hippie, but she wasn't. And my dad was a little bit old school before that. And I think I was trying to like catch up with that. So I was basically, I remember reading Ken Kesey. He's an author who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and there was this other book about him called The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, and it was about basically the start of the hippies and the counterculture movement in California, and not just kind of, it had a bit of a philosophical feel to it. It wasn't just purely about indulgence and that kind of thing, So I was really into music, and I was into kind of experiences, and being kind of wild and trying to like find some truth, some meaning, in all of that. And then when I went to college, I went to University of Colorado in Boulder, and by then I was pretty bad I was partying a lot, and I was just sort of I was going to crash basically, but it just took me getting out of Texas, getting up to Colorado, getting into university, and what I found was there's always somebody who will stay up later or drink one more beer or smoke one more joint, or what, it was like there was no limit. And eventually I just sort of I remember my grandfather died, my mother's father died, and that kind of shook me a bit, and eventually I just sort of hit the wall and needed to kind of get my life together, basically. So I decided to drop out of college, and I started doing like recovery work. Basically, I was doing a lot of counseling, and I was going to 12-step programs. And like, I'm not an alcoholic, but at that time it was helpful for me to go to 12-step programs because it was just a way to talk about what was really going on and have a kind of a community around me that I could start to kind of get my act together, And so then I guess I was thinking about like, why were my parents the way they were? Why were their parents the way they were? Like, and I grew up in this society where it was this, I called it the crazy train. I went to this private school, and you wanted to get the best grades you could to get into the best university you could, to get the best job you could, to get the best house and car and family, and it was just this whole kind of materialistic kind of trip. And I saw people around me, billionaires even, people with, huge amounts of money from oil and that kind of stuff, and some of them were happy and some of them were miserable, and it was pretty clear to me that money wasn't the answer to happiness, or that kind of material struggle wasn't really the source of happiness. And so then I got really interested in like my ancestors and my kind of like what made me the way I am kind of thing, and where did things kind of go off track in terms of some sense of balance and integrity and like just a connection with God and with the divine in a way that was like central to life, and not just this sort of thing you give lip service to or sort of go through the motions about, And I remember also people would try and connect through other traditions, like the Native American tradition. There was a lot of people that were interested in Native American spirituality or kind of the New Age movement and different things like that. And but I always had this sense of like white people weren't bad always, It wasn't like, I had to say, oh, I'm this terrible, Western European imperialist jerk. Like, it wasn't, I didn't do it, I just this guy that was born in Texas, So I didn't really buy into this thing of that I was going to sell that out and become, something that I wasn't, basically. So that got me really interested in my ancestors. And then eventually I moved back to Texas. I started university again. I got a degree in German studies and philosophy, like Nietzsche philosophy, and I started doing a lot of movement and modern dance, which had kind of come through the psychotherapy work that I've been doing in Colorado. And that got me interested in body-based kind of movement practice, really.
So till that point, like, you haven't really been in the Christian faith as such.
No, yeah. I mean, my grandparents would have been Methodist. My dad would have been raised going to church. They went to church early in their marriage, but then they moved away from it. I think they felt kind of just they rejected it, basically. So, but it was never I was never influenced in a way that they thought the church was bad. It was just that we never went to church. There wasn't any kind of formal Sunday school or church or congregation or anything that I was a part of. So I would go stay with friends on the weekend, and somebody might be a Jewish friend, and I'd go to the synagogue with them, or somebody might be, whatever it is, Presbyterian. I don't remember any Catholics, but I always liked going to the Sunday school. I always liked kind of being in conversations, talking about things that were, meaningful and interesting and bigger questions in life. And I kind of felt I was missing that, So yeah, the other kind of, there's another parallel track to this story. So my twin brother, he went to college up in New York, and he started practicing meditation. There was a Zen monastery near where he lived, or where he went to university. And we would get together over the summers, and we would sort of we call it osmosis because we're twins. It's just this thing when we're with each other. It's like this kind of.
What is Zen meditation for those who don't know?
Well, Zen would be within the Buddhist tradition, and the Zen lineage, let's say, would have come from China and Japan mostly, also Korea, other kind of that part of Asia where the Buddhist teaching spread. And I'm not expert on it, but what I would say is that it's essentially, a tradition of a Buddhist religion, and within it there's meditation practice, and the meditation that he was taught that I was learning through him was essentially just a simple observation of the breath kind of exercise, and like a concentration and a focusing type meditation that a lot of people would call it mindfulness now, would come from a lot of the Zen tradition, I think. So there's different orders or schools within the Buddhist tradition. But anyway, we would get together and we like took these big road trips like out to California and up the West Coast into Canada and stuff, and we'd be meditating every day. And I was starting to get kind of connected to that through him. But at the same time, I had my own kind of thing going where I was doing movement and modern dance and studying Carl Jung and Nietzsche, and I kind of was coming up with this body-based somatic sort of wisdom practice, let's call it. And it was very much about creativity and expression as well as being in touch with the body. A lot of the work that I did in psychotherapy when I was in Colorado was about healing trauma through more not just talking about what happened in your life, but getting in touch physically with what's going on in your body and where pain and issues and things are stored and how you access that and how you work through it, and using creativity and more physical experience as a way to access and work through that. So that kind of was the track or the path I was on, and then my brother decided to go to France to ordain as a Zen Buddhist monk with a teacher named Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a Vietnamese Zen teacher. And by then I had gone back to college and I had graduated. And I knew I wanted to come to Europe because I was interested in tracing my roots. And I'd had this vision, I remember really clearly this vision of coming to Europe and like touching the land where my ancestors are from. And I had this image of this, like this silver rope or kind of a braid or something that was like all of my kind of spiritual heritage from my ancestors that kind of went back in time or something, and that I was going to go to Europe and touch that and connect with that. And then I remember in that vision I was having just a lot of light was coming through, and some light was coming like behind me and through my heart and opening up, and it was like this sort of I had this idea in my mind of soul retrieval, like it was this way of going through my roots to hand back what was negative and that I wanted to get rid of, basically, and to connect with what was good that I had lost, And so that I had that image, and that's what I was going to do. So I came to Europe after I graduated university. So my landing point was this monastery in France. So I went to my brother's Zen Buddhist monastery in France, and it was amazing. It was a really beautiful community and so positive and so powerful. It was similar kind of to what Gosha was describing around that feeling of being loved and being connected and feeling like you're with real people who are talking about real stuff. And it was like, wow, this is what I've been looking for kind of feeling, And I spent 3 months in that monastery, daily practice of sitting and walking, and all day long you're practicing mindfulness, where anytime the clock bell rings, you stop and breathe. The phone rings, you stop and breathe, and you're just in the present, in the present, in the present constantly. And you're practicing what they call the 5 precepts. So the kind of entry point into Buddhist religion is these 5 moral precepts, which are not to kill, not to steal, not to commit any sexual misconduct, which basically means don't have sex outside of a committed relationship. Not to speak any lies or harsh words or, destructive words, and not to take any intoxicants. And so I was living in this community that lived on that basis, and then we had that daily practice going on every day, and that would bring stuff up, and you would have to work through stuff, but it was physical and it was grounded in a way. It was like, okay, now I realized that Buddha had figured quite a lot out, and that this is a more sustainable way of having this body-based transformative kind of practice that people can share and access and live, in community with. It's not that I didn't still have an interest in creativity and artistic expression and movement and dance and stuff, but it was kind of hard to like get a whole bunch of people to do that together with me and talk about Nietzsche and philosophy and how this all works. It just was a bit too makey-uppy,
Yeah.
So then I started traveling to the different countries like that I had planned to do. And when I came here to Ireland, I ended up meeting the woman who I was married to now for the last, we were together for about 20 years since I first came to Ireland, basically in May of 1999. And she had been practicing this technique of meditation called Vipassana meditation, which is also a Buddhist tradition or lineage. And she said, well, if you're into all this, like deep practice, but also having it very much a root in physical experience and physical sensation as the way that you access like the truth and that you access real experience of life and how you transform yourself, you got to try one of these 10-day retreats. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. So a month later, we didn't know what our relationship was. We just met and sort of something there, but she's a lot older than I was, still is. And we couldn't quite figure out like what is this thing about us, but there's definitely a thing where I was meant to like find her and go learn this technique. So I went to England and I sat one of the 10-day meditation courses, and then I knew this is what I was looking for. This is the path I've been looking to find. My brother's teacher had asked, did I want to be a monk? And I was really like flattered by that, but I didn't feel like the click and like this is meant for me, But when I came into that meditation hall for the first time and sat for that 10 days in the center in England, it was just like a very, very profound, transformative 10-day experience. And from there, I ended up continuing to travel around Europe, but then eventually we ended up going to India and Burma together, and I spent about 3 or 4 months the first trip in India and Burma with all these old students and teachers from the same tradition, and meeting the kind of main teacher in the lineage, a man named S.N. Gwenka.
What actually happens in that retreat? I think the last time you explained it, I think it was really helpful to know what actually happens.
What is it?
What is it?
So the tradition of Vipassana, the practice of Vipassana, is rooted in the kind of core teaching of liberation by the Buddha. So Buddha lived 2,600 years ago, in northern India, in and around, in between kind of Varanasi and Calcutta, that kind of region. And when he became enlightened, he taught he taught a whole bunch of sermons, or what are called sutras in the Buddhist tradition, but there's one in particular called the Satipatthana Sutta. Sutta is the term in the Pali language, which he spoke at that time. It was the common language at that time. And that's called the Four Establishments of Mindfulness, and a lot of what people think of as mindfulness meditation is basically originated in that core kind of formulation of practice. And essentially what it has to do with is understanding the truth of impermanence and change at the actual physical level, and learning how to come out of suffering that we create for ourselves through this blind habit pattern of reacting to things in our lives, whether they're good and we want to have more of it, or it's bad and we want it to go away. Like that essentially is what causes suffering, is that blind craving for having or getting rid of stuff. Actually, the essence of that is this idea of I. So this idea of I am this separate ego, I am this individual self that lives forever, that needs to have all these things, needs to live, needs to be protected, needs it's this I want. That actually is really the essence of where misery comes from. So on a 10-day course, I'm kind of jumping to like the essence of what the teaching is, which is pretty fast. But anyway, I'll back up a little bit. So on a 10-day course, you come in, and the first thing you do is you take those 5 precepts. So you know, for these 10 days, I'm basically, you know, not going to at the physical or vocal level do any of these harmful things for myself or anyone else. And I'm only and when you cut all those things out, the only thing that's left is pretty much wholesome things at the physical and vocal level. You're also silent for 10 days, so it helps not to be
Okay, so
lies.
it's a
because-
silent retreat.
Yeah.
Easy
Yeah.
not to say anything
Yeah.
bad.
No, you may talk to the teacher when you have questions and answers, and you can make some stuff up then. So you got to kind of watch that.
And you
then.
don't have any access to the phone or no connection whatsoever.
Yeah, so you're basically signing up to live as a monk or a nun for 10 days. You're handing over all your material possessions, no phone, no reading materials, no any kind of stimulus for the mind is just put aside. Any practices, any prayers, anything that you do that you think is your kind of spiritual practice or religion, you just say, okay, for 10 days, I'm setting this aside because I'm going to give this technique a fair trial. I won't know if it's really working if I'm mixing it up with other stuff, so I'm just going to do this for 10 days. So then in the first night of the course, you learn the technique of Anapana meditation, which is a technique where you learn to observe the breath or respiration, and you learn to keep your mind and your attention focused in this small triangular area of the upper lip and the nose and the nostrils. And you're just observing natural, normal breath. You're not trying to control it. You're not trying to practice pranayama or breathing kind of exercises. It's more literally just observe the natural breath. And over 3 days, and you get up early. You're up at 4 in the morning. You go to bed at like 9:30 in the evening, and you're sitting for a total of 10 hours a day plus a discourse. And they're in like
10 hours blocks in.
It's 1 hour chunks.
Okay.
So you get up at 4, you sit from 4:30 to 6:30, then you have breakfast and rest, and then you start sitting again from 8 until 11 o'clock, and then you
Wow,
have
that
lunch
that
and
is
rest. And
a lot of commitment. And,
Yeah.
and all you're doing in those 10-hour or hour blocks
Mhm.
is just being silent and just observing your breath.
yeah, and you get a lot of instruction. So there's basically this man Goenkaji taught hundreds and hundreds of courses, and then they came up with a way for it to basically scale up where they recorded all of the instructions that he was giving and the discourses that he gave and everything. And then eventually he started appointing assistant teachers, and they were able to run these courses on his behalf all over the world. Now there's over 200 centers all over the world where the courses are run. And it's all run on a donation basis. There's no charge for the courses. It's basically if you finish the course and you think it was good for you and you want to donate for someone else to sit a course, then you can give whatever you feel like giving. There's no like price on it. Nobody's paid for teaching or anything like that. So it's really pure. Like there's no kind of there's no gimmick to it. There's no
Yeah,
kind of like
there's no hidden agenda.
No,
or yeah,
no,
it's
it's
just like
just-
pure.
it's just
Mm.
it's really pure, yeah. So you're for those first 3 days you're sitting there observing the breath, and at first it's like the mind just wanders. You can't keep it for 10 seconds, you know, and you realize how like crazy your mind actually is and how difficult it is to hold attention, you know. But over 3 days, eventually your mind gets more calm, it gets more concentrated, it gets more focused, you're able to hold your attention for longer and longer stretches at a time, and you start to really see and feel and experience the truth of how anytime something comes up in your mind, it affects the breath. So if you remember something that you didn't like and you feel angry, then the breath gets short and then it goes back to normal again. And so you start to understand this connection between the mind and the body, because the breath is something whether you can consciously control it, but also like when you're asleep, it's just happening. So it's this bridge between the conscious and the unconscious mind. And those first 3 days help you sharpen the mind, concentrate the mind, get to where you can like master your mind. Ultimately, is where you're trying to get to with it. This to be able to absorb and to concentrate yourself. And then, as you're doing that, you start to notice that you can feel a little sensation in and around this area where you're keeping your attention. And it's sensation anywhere that the mind and the body is touching. There is sensation. It's anywhere there's life. Basically, there is sensation. but we don't feel that subtle level of sensation because our minds are too extroverted and too gross most of the time. But when you're in this environment, it's like a laboratory, and you can get yourself really focused and dialed in, and you can really feel what's going on at a very subtle level. So by the fourth day, you have this ability to concentrate, to kind of keep yourself focused, and you can feel very subtle reality going on within yourself. So then you shift over to the practice of Vipassana meditation on the fourth day, and that practice is a practice of moving your attention systematically from head to toe through your body, feeling sensation throughout the body. So for, again, hours, chunks at a time, that same schedule, you just keep showing up and you keep practicing, keep moving your awareness through the body over and over and over and over and over and over again. And then what happens is you start going deeper and deeper into the unconscious mind. So anything that happens at the physical, anything that comes through any of the sense doors or the mind shows up as sensation. So you tell me some story, it's a beautiful story. The images that you talk about make me remember or associate with things in my life or in my, memory that link to what you're talking about. Those things are good because I evaluate them from my past experience as good. That releases little tiny biochemical stuff in the body that creates a pleasant sensation, and I want more of that. That's the habit pattern, is that I want more of it. I want more of it. I want more of it. And maybe the opposite's true. You tell me a negative story, and I'm like, ugh, I don't like it. I want it to go away. So this is happening all the time within our minds at the depth, but we don't feel it physically all the time. It's more like, if it's an intense or strong thing, we might feel it, but it's more like just happening kind of below the surface. And then we sort of have these thoughts or these obsessions or these emotions or these moods that come and go. And they can run us and drive us, and they do run us and drive us and take us into places we don't want to go and behavior we don't want to behave. And so what this is trying to do is get you down into the like engine room of what's really going on in your mind. And the idea is that if you can observe this physical sensation and just observe it without reacting to it, then you have a chance to change this habit pattern, because it's no longer this abstract, weird thing. It's more like this truth that you're physically, truly experiencing within yourself. And so what you start to understand over these hours and hours of practice is that whatever's going on in your mind, it does show up as a physical sensation, but it is not permanent. Anything that comes up in your mind, it comes up, lasts for some time, goes away, comes up, lasts for some time, goes away. So what you're doing is training your mind to just observe that truth of change, not get bothered by whether it's a pleasant thing or an unpleasant thing. Just understand whatever it is, it's coming up. It's either gross and solidified, or it's subtle and fine. It's either pleasant or it's unpleasant, but whatever it is, it's changing. And you hear this term, it's called anicca. Anicca means permanent, anicca means not permanent. And over and over again, you hear this word anicca, 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 and you understand more and more and more everything that goes on within my mind and my body is changing constantly all the time. And then the other thing that's important is, so you're learning how you have this habit in your mind, and you're learning how you keep kind of reacting to stuff, and then you learn to stop reacting. But what you also start to experience is that when I stop reacting to any new input, what happens is all of my old conditioning, all of my old experiences, all of my old, basically, in the Buddhist language, kama or karma in the Sanskrit language, but kama in the Pali language, basically all those past reactions from however far back they go, they all start coming up on the surface. So you're having this thought or this memory of something, it creates this sensation, you're not reacting to it, and then every past conditioning associated with that experience, or that kind of signature of experience, it all comes up, it all comes up, it all comes up. And it's quite powerful, it's quite intense, and it can, and you go through all these different states and experiences and kind of moods and emotions, and it's a roller coaster really, but it's very powerful, and it's very liberating, because you're able to get at stuff that you couldn't access or like dig up before. It's like stuff that was, you knew there's stuff in there, it's kind of driving me, I'm always angry at this person, and then like I can't let go of it.
It's all that baggage.
Yeah,
that you're bringing up.
exactly. So it's just like wave after wave after wave of all this stuff is coming up and passing away, coming up and passing away. So at the end of the 10 days, you feel like, wow, like I've kind of come out of this. It's like an archaeological dig, and you've like freed yourself from so much of this bondage of this habit pattern of our mind, and over 10 days you have a pretty big wake up wow experience. But like what Gosha was saying, that it's not you do that and you're enlightened and you're done. It's more you do that and you know how to get enlightened and you know how to do the work. But then how much work you have to do is different for every person. There's no kind of fixed time limit or fixed sort of it will happen in this amount of time that you will come out of all your misery. But now you know how to work, and if you keep a practice going every day, an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, and keep that up, then it's like you just keep going and keep going and keep going, and your life pattern changes. And what I found was a lot of things in my life changed. A lot of things became much more positive in my life.
And the goal is to get to a place where there are no more of those emotions coming up.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people think, oh, it's Buddhism. You kind of become this like vegetable and let anybody come and hit you with a club or something, and you're not going to react to it. And it's like that's not what that is. It's what you're learning is, or what you're trying to do is to come out of that state of reactivity and that state of all this past conditioning affecting and influencing what's going on in the present moment. What you're trying to do is get to a point where you're just here, now, present, in reality, clean.
Yeah,
nothing,
and you're just observing everything that is changing.
Everything is just true.
Just be aware.
Change. Yeah, exactly.
It's like sharpening your awareness of what's happening.
Yeah, it's the expression is that you're purifying your mind. You're coming out of all of these different negativities, and so the goal is so there's this this technical term. It's called sankhara. Sankhara means a reaction. So this chain of events happens in our mind all the time, and at the point where you perceive something, you evaluate it, the sensation comes up. At that moment, you can either react to it, which is sankhara, or you can not react to it, and you just let that old sankhara come up and pass away, old sankhara come up and pass away. So it's this kind of track that you can either go in the direction of liberation, or you can stay on the road of bondage or suffering. And so over time, practice, years and years and years in the Buddhist belief, lifetime after lifetime, however long it takes, you keep working on this, you keep practicing this until eventually there's no more past stock to work through. All your old conditioning, all the old reactions have come up and been released. And eventually then you get to a point where there is no more kind of fuel to feed this machine of birth and death anymore. Like all of those past reactions are kind of what keeps you going and keeps you moving through the realm of suffering, basically, of life and death, of life and death, of life and death. So when all the old ones are gone, then what a Buddha or someone who's called an arahant, that's someone who becomes fully enlightened, experiences is this experience of nirvana or nibbana. Again, I'm shifting between Pali and Sanskrit, where you experience a state that's beyond mind and matter. You're no longer in this state of cause and effect anymore, because there is no more fuel to keep you moving and rotating in these realms. And that's what the Buddhists call nirvana or nibbana, which is you can't consciously explain it or put it into words.
It's almost like an idea of a heaven or paradise where you're not in this realm of suffering.
Yeah,
almost.
It is. Yeah, it's a reality, but it's a reality beyond anything you can conceive of. I guess is the idea, and it's a progressive journey. So the Buddhist cosmology talks about these 31 different planes of existence. So we're at the human realm, and there's like 4 lower realms, and then there's 20, whatever the difference is, higher realms. And if you're in any of those, you're still in this realm of cause and effect. And so the thing about that Vipassana talks about, and the reason why it's important to work with sensation on the body, is because if you don't do that, you're not digging up all the lower realm stuff. You're not. And I think of this as like sin in the Christian kind of tradition. If you're just sort of focusing on heaven and trying to be good and just trying to go for it and sort of, get yourself up there, but you're not like facing the truth of your sin or your impurity, then you'll always have this lead anchor that you're kind of dragging around the place, and it will always pull you back down and pull you back down. And the danger is actually if you let that negative, impure part of who you are take over, then you can get sucked down and go into hell or go into these lower realms. So the first goal of the practice really is to like secure yourself at least at human level. But the work of Vipassana, you're clearing out all of the heavier, darker, negative stuff that would cause you to go down, basically.
So it's kind of similar to, it's like not to be in hiding. It's like Adam, and Eve. They did something and they were hiding, and the whole idea is to stop hiding. Yeah. Uncover it, bring it to your awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think of confession and confessing sin. I'm not baptized yet, but my idea or my sense of it is that it's a very similar kind of goal and experience in a way.
Some ways.
It's like to come in contact with something very pure, and in that state of purity, allow all of your shadow and all of your mess to come up and be, washed away, basically.
So did it ever feel like it was a lot of self-work, like it was almost like you on your own journeying through this? It was like 100% you.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think in this teaching and how I've been trained over this past 20 years is you have to do the work. God's not going to just let you in for nothing kind of thing, So but at the same time, it's a paradox as well, because I'm not actually purifying myself. I'm doing the work to basically to open myself up, so that doing this work of moving the awareness, that they talk about the two wheels of awareness and equanimity, which means to feel and be aware of the sensation, understand its changing nature, but also not to react to it, just observe it. And the observation is like an effortless observation. You're not trying to dig stuff up or to work through stuff. You're just trying to put yourself in a state where this purification can happen. And the actual purification is happening through, if you want to call it God, or in the Buddhist language, the Dharma or the Dhamma, the law of nature. That is what is actually doing the purification. And when you sit, eventually you start by sitting 10-day courses, then eventually if you get really into it, you can sit longer courses, 20-day, 35. They even have 45, 60-day courses that people sit. And as I would go deeper and deeper into the practice, the teaching that I was receiving along with that practice was that eventually you get to a point where you're not forcing yourself to practice. You just are in this state of mind all the time. And then it's just, you let the Dhamma do the work. You let God purify you. You're not doing it. But there still is definitely a sense of every day you've got to put in the effort. You have to do the work. Otherwise, it won't work. You can kind of coast for a while, but then after a while, then all the old habit patterns and the old conditioning and everything just kind of kick back in, and you can just go off course, and it's just this nice memory of something that happened, and you're going off track again, basically.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had this amazing wake up and meaning of life, and this is my road and my path, and this is why I'm here.
Sorted for life.
Pretty much, or lives, like lifetimes,
Yeah, you definitely felt at home there.
Yeah. And then after the first course, we were traveling together, and we realized we had this calling together that we were going to walk on this path together, and that eventually we became teachers together, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was an amazing journey to be on, and but then at the same time, I guess I had this idea of what that life would be and was making steps in that direction. But then I also was making choices to live in this world, to be a management consultant, to be in a relationship with somebody that was 20 years older than me, to have this material life, which wasn't a bad thing. And in many ways, it all kind of worked and hung together as it was intended to for a number of years. But over time, I think just the material world and the worldly life and, choosing to get a really nice home and get a big mortgage and be working in this super pressurized, stressful world of management consulting and trying to keep my daily practice going, but the whole thing of serving and having more time to eventually to teach and everything, that just became kind of smaller and smaller part of my life. And this other dimension just kind of took up more and more and more. And in many ways it was good because I was learning how to like be in the world and to work hard and to like, it made me strong in a lot of ways, and they fed each other. The practice made it possible for me to do all that, and having that experience toughened me up to be able to practice more, kind of with power, I guess. But ultimately I just got off track, and, I will always have, and we will always have a kind of this, I don't know, unconditional, respect and care for and love for each other. But I also just came to realize, like, I'm actually someone who's this age, who's basically trying to live as a monk and be a management consultant. And there was all these like kind of just fundamental being real, being human, being a man stuff that I was denying myself, that eventually was never going to be sustainable, I think. And so within all that, I was just getting really kind of spun out, and I was kind of living this life of this facade of kind of, I was this teacher and I was meant to be this really pure guy, and I was like, kind of having this practice and everything. But behind the scenes, I just felt really upset, really miserable, really out of balance, really kind of split, actually, And that's really where I think Jesus was starting to find me, I didn't see it quite at first, but a few years ago, I had kind of come to the point where I knew my marriage wasn't going to last, and that I needed to step away from being a teacher, and that I needed to basically just press the reset button on my life. But I was completely afraid of how I would do it. And I was trying to keep going with my meditation, but in the meditation itself, it would just be storm after storm after storm, of a lot of just like confronting the truth of who I am, my sexuality, like, where had I gotten to, like what was going on. And my father's health wasn't great. He was close to dying. He ended up making a comeback, and he's stable now. We don't know how long he'll be, but he's got some time to go. But I was I remember sitting and thinking, he's going to be gone. Everybody I know that I love, and this is part of Buddhist practice, is, everybody who you love is going to die. Everything that you're close to is going to die. It's just truth. It's just reality, But I was kind of just having this sense of, I'm miserable. I've signed myself up for this thing, which I thought was this pure, amazing thing, but it's become a prison now, basically. And I remember sitting on a course. It was at one of the meditation centers. It was in Massachusetts, and I was in a meditation cell, which is kind of this little closet, and you just sit there, for hour after hour every day. And I remember sitting there, and I would have these, all the time it happens when I'm sitting, like music comes through my mind all the time. It's like this jukebox that's always going on.
It's true.
And it's true because I play music all the time. But anyway, this U2 song, I still haven't found what I was looking for, was coming through my mind in that moment when I was sitting. And it's a very Christian song when you listen to it. And Bono's voice is so beautiful, but and when you're sitting and you're in this deep state of practice, when you do hear music or remember things, it has this power because you're feeling it like at a very deep level beyond just if you're hearing it on the radio when you're driving the car. So anyway, I'm sitting there kind of like at my wit's end, feeling like I'm failing on the meditation because I'm not able to sit properly, and feeling like my life's on the rocks, and just miserable, basically, very unhappy. And that song was going through my mind. And then he gets to this point in the lyrics where he talks about, you loose the thorns, you broke the chains, you loose the thorns, you broke the chains, you carried the cross of my shame. And that word shame in particular, I was feeling a lot of shame. I felt like ashamed of my sexuality, ashamed of that I had failed as a husband, I had failed as a teacher, I had failed as in my work. Like work was okay, but like I just felt like I was just up, like life had just, it was just all wrong basically, and I just felt a lot of shame, which was being way too hard on myself, but that's just what I felt. And so then hearing those lyrics or feeling that song being like played through the stereo of my mind basically, and then in that space I just remember seeing Jesus as those lyrics were going through my mind, and having this image of him on the ground being put onto the cross, and then him kind of inviting me to be with him on the cross, and then this feeling of being lifted up with him. And also I was in a very deep place of meditation then, like the meditation was working at that moment, and I just felt very powerful sensation in the center of my heart, and this feeling of every lifetime I had lived and all the baggage I had carried and all the misery that I had carried was just sort of like crystallizing, and sort of this flow or this stream of kind of pain, and this feeling of sensation around it, and just letting it kind of arise and pass and rise and pass, arise and pass, and it was just kind of this fountain of all the past misery of my existence, and then seeing Jesus there and kind of having this understanding or this insight that that's what he's doing, but he's not doing it for himself, he's doing it for all of humanity, for all of ever humanity that ever existed in the past and in the future. And it was like this feeling of this kind of circular tidal wave, sort of universal, I don't know, it was like the Big Bang or vortex or something of kind of compassion and mercy that he was embodying and holding and purifying the cosmos through his heart. That was the sort of feeling I had being there with him. And it just gave me this insight into that's what he really is that, and him coming to me there, it was just this feeling of complete acceptance, complete mercy, complete sort of love and forgiveness and transformation was the feeling,
Wow,
really,
it's amazing,
powerful, yeah. And so I felt like I still had to like walk the road to justify everything in my life, but I kind of had this feeling of, I didn't come away with that thinking, now I'm going to go get baptized and be a Catholic. I just had this feeling of, wow, that was really amazing and powerful, and I feel really grateful, that I experienced it, And then over that next year, that was when I quit my job. I resigned as a teacher. Eventually, and then I went to Israel as well to teach meditation with my wife. And I remember being in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is the place where, the first of the sorrowful mysteries happens. And the guide, he was a meditation teacher. He's a guide in Jerusalem, and he was talking to us about this is where the olive grove is, and the olives are pressed into oil here. And this is also where Jesus was praying, and he prayed so hard he was sweating blood. And it made me think of the practice of Vipassana and how you when you're working in that practice and you're feeling your whole body and you're letting all the sin and all the impurity come out, it's like you're being squeezed and you're being purified at that physical level, and it's like olives being pressed into olive oil kind of thing. And Jesus was praying so hard, he was sweating blood, and I had this real powerful kind of connection with him then, that like the way he prayed and the way he kind of connected with God was at that depth of complete, like nothing was held back, and that sense of dread that he had, and that sense of take this cup away from me 3 times, he talks about, in that moment, and he was starting to see, like, this is what I'm up against, this is what's going to happen, And I think I was feeling this sense of I hadn't made the decision to leave my marriage. I hadn't made the decision to quit my job. I hadn't made the decision to stop being a meditation teacher yet. But I knew I had to, like I knew it was coming,
And was that because of that encounter with Jesus, or was that kind of a continuous process over the year, or was it kind of this one
I
point?
think it was like December 2016 or something, or January 2017 in the Massachusetts thing, and then it was like spring of 2017 when I was in Israel, and then is that right? Yeah, and then I changed jobs and started my new job in the end of 2017, and then I sat another course. I think it was in 2018 over Christmas, early 2018, January 2018, and I remember sitting again. This was in Texas this time, and by then I knew I had to leave. I knew things were going to change. I hadn't said it. I hadn't made the call yet, but I knew it was coming. And again, I was sitting a course where I couldn't sit. It was just storm after storm. But then I found this radio station that played gospel music on the iPod. I was listening to the discourses. You're not supposed to listen to radio or anything like that. But
But you could, because you were the teacher.
But I was a teacher, I was sitting a different course to other people. And I had my own cell and everything, and I was listening to the discourses using an iPod. But I was cheating and found this radio on the iPod, and I was just trying to I was just going mad basically, and I was like, I can't just sit here with myself and face it all. It's too much, And so I was listening to the classic rock station, but I was like, this isn't really doing it for me. But then I found a gospel station, and it was like, there, I feel home base, like something in here is kind of meeting me, So then. Eventually, it was at the end of that year, 2018, October, that's when I really made the decision and said, well, I just came clean because my life was off the rails. I'd started drinking. I'd started smoking pot. It was complete mess, basically. But I basically kind of fessed up to my wife, this needs to change. I can't stay in this relationship anymore. And it wasn't like she had betrayed me or harmed me or done anything, bad to me or anything like that. It was just, I just knew where she was in her life and where I was in my life. We were going in different directions, and I just had to be honest about that and have the balls basically to say it's got to change. And we spent some time assessing kind of will it work, going through counseling, but I think in my heart I knew, and she knew, I knew this is going to be over. So I guess in a way that was sort of following Gethsemane, the kind of I went through all that dread of going into the unknown and kind of facing up to all this truth and making these decisions and taking these steps. But once I finally did, and it kind of broke it was like the wound was lanced, and the kind of the healing could start, and so. But even then, I didn't realize I was going to come to the church and be baptized. I just knew Jesus was showing up a lot in my life, And then, so then,
as he does, just casually,
yeah.
He's just very persistent.
yeah. And then, no, I have to say, I was also at that time, and it's funny because Ghosh and I were listening to gospel this morning, and the whole message was around in our vulnerability is where he meets us. He's talking about St. Paul when he first started preaching, and him saying let everybody come basically to Jesus through the power of God, not through me being a big time preacher, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm trembling and
funny
I'm
timing today,
afraid and everything. Yeah.
Wow.
And like basically for a long period in the marriage I was fine, but after a while I felt like I was kind of trapped in this thing of I wasn't like being pure enough and I wasn't meditating hard enough and I wasn't, you know, kind of like being, you know, whatever, perfect enough basically. And eventually, like, I was struggling. I was like, you know, getting mixed up in pornography and just like it was just a mess, you know. And I actually started going to 12-step meetings for a while as a way to try and, like, you know, cope with that and deal with that. And it was amazing. It was actually really, really helpful, and it really helped me. And there was stuff that happened earlier in my life that was, you know, background that I needed to really confront and address. And I had done a lot of that, like in therapy and healing and stuff, but and the meditation itself and the marriage in a lot of ways was this kind of refuge and this kind of way of kind of finding and security and safety and everything. But there was still levels of acceptance that I hadn't reached yet, and levels of kind of, you know, just like healing and transformation that I had to get to, you know. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think Jesus was coming to me through that 12-step experience as well. And my sponsor in that process was, we were talking about my relationship with God, and it's similar to what Gosha was saying around, okay, fine, you've got this really strong meditation practice, you've got all this faith, you're a teacher, you know, you believe in all this stuff, but like, do you have a really personal one-to-one connection with God as you understand him or her? And can you go to him with very specific, very detailed, very vulnerable, what's really messed up for you and not working, and what do you know, what do you need to surrender, you know? And I think that was missing for me. So in that period of time, again, Jesus was coming to me through that connection and through that relationship. And so eventually, you know, last year I, you know, moved out, got my own place, and resigned as a meditation teacher. Work was just work, you know, it was kind of keeping on. But then this friend, Justina, who I know because my old friend Steve is married to her, she and Steve were actually helping me during this period as well to make the decision and to kind of come through this whole kind of period and process and everything. And so I was talking to her, and she was telling me a bit about her faith, not preaching, not trying to kind of push me or anything, but just who she was in that process and how she was talking to me and how she was helping me to really just get clear in my heart, like, where is it that I'm going? What's the decision I have to make? What are the actions I need to take? Just her presence and helping me through that was really powerful. And she would say herself, she was asking Jesus to help me and praying for me all the time. So I had moved out, and I'd moved down to a farm in Wicklow, and I just had this feeling, like I was saying, I used the word scaffolding, like my life had been defined by, you know, this spiritual path and practice up until very recently, and the role that I played, the mask I wore, the kind of, you know, person who I thought I was no longer. And that had happened over stages, you know, it wasn't like an overnight thing, but the actual physical fact of having moved out of the house and being on my own was sort of a, you know, disorienting feeling, basically. And I remember taking a walk on the beach, and I was just sort of walking along, and the waves were decent size that day. They were kind of coming in strong, and I just remember having this sense of wanting to be baptized and wanting to have confession. And the feeling I had associated with that was this sense of needing to be contained within some sort of spiritual structure of some kind, and having something to move in the direction of, or that could pull me forward, and to not go off, you know, into shadow. You know, it was like I needed to stay safe, and I needed to stay moving in the direction of the light. and that sense of wanting baptism and wanting confession it was just crystallized in my mind, kind of in that moment, you know. And then what was interesting is I got home from the walk and I texted Justina, our friend, and told her I want to get baptized, and she was like, "You're joking." And I said, "No, I really do. I'm serious." And she said, "Wow, I was praying for you today." And she was praying for me at the moment I was having the walk, because I kind of linked up the timing. And she said, the gospel today was about the prodigal son in the mass that she went to, and she sent me this like picture of the what was written about the prodigal son. And I remember just breaking down, crying, and having this very like deep grief, you know, like kind of feeling of really letting go, kind of shaking me in a way, and feeling this sense of being held and being kind of similar to what you were describing, I think, Gosha, in your testimony of that story of the prodigal son, of just that acceptance and that unconditional love and that welcoming kind of, you know, feeling that was coming through. So that was really amazing, obviously. And then I think it was around that time that we were starting to have met and get to know each other and spend time together, and we were talking about at the beginning of the relationship, you know, that we wanted to pray for our relationship and pray, you know, that we you know, that we're protected, and that whatever it is we're meant to be with each other, for each other, that we should give it to Jesus to you know, support us, you know. So you said, well, why don't we go to my church down the road from where you live? And it's St. Saviour's, you know. And so we went into St. Saviour's, and it's a beautiful church there on Dorset Street and Dominic Street, because it's in the Dominican Priory and all that. I didn't know anything about Dominicans, Franciscans, whatever, you know. There's a priest who's a Franciscan who I'm really close to, and he's kind of become my godfather in a way. And he'll kind of come into the story a little bit more as well, but I don't really know about it. Like, I don't have all the background. It's like when I came over here and I started watching football, like I decided to start watching Manchester United, and I didn't know this history of Liverpool and this and how tribal it was and everything. It was just like, you know, yeah, that's the team I want to watch, you know. So not that all the denominations are tribal, but there are different denominations, and it just so happened that Gosha goes to this church, and there's Polish priests
community
there, and that is kind of, I guess, the connection, and it's near to where you live, and it so happens it's also a Dominican Priory. So anyway, we went in, and there's an image of Jesus called the Divine Mercy, and it's this beautiful image of him with these kind of rays emanating from his heart, and there's an altar and candles, and so that's where, and it's kind of a Polish altar in the church, because that image and that whole whatever it's called, tradition within the Catholic Church comes from Poland, from a Saint Faustina who lived kind of in between, well, late 19th, early 20th century, or early middle 20th century. So we were praying and lighting a candle to that, and then it so happened that all the monks were coming in, or the priests were coming in for their morning sort of chanting on it was a Saturday, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. And it was really beautiful. It was just kind of, you know,
it felt like a blessing, you know.
Yeah, we felt we received a blessing, and we got many blessings of that type, as you say. Like, you can't base your faith on these moments, but actually they are happening, you know.
And this was the first time you went to St. Saviour's.
Yeah, the first time. And so we went in, we lit a candle, and then I guess that was the first time I saw that image, or knew what that image was.
Yeah.
Really. And then we just sat in the pews while the priests were coming in and doing a chanting. You know, it just felt beautiful, and I could really feel like the faith here is alive. It's a living kind of.
We just completely relaxed to it, you know, and we just kind of surrendered and said, okay, let this take over, you know.
Yeah. It was lovely. Yeah, and so then, I guess not long after that, then I think it was the next week or a couple of weeks after, we had Easter here, and there was Easter, and we went to Wicklow for Easter, and then the next weekend was the Divine Mercy Mass, which happens the Sunday after Easter. And so this image again is used in that Mass, and the whole sort of tradition around the Divine Mercy, which I only started to learn about. I was starting to get an understanding of it. But basically, Saint Faustina, before she became a saint, was a nun in Poland, and she was in Warsaw and Vilnius in Lithuania, is it Lithuania, or am I getting the countries' names wrong?
Somewhere there.
There's in the Baltics, it's Vilnius. There's Estonia, there's Latvia, and it's Lithuania. Yeah, I think I got it right. Anyway, she had all these unbelievable revelations and direct contact with Jesus, and received this sort of transmission from him to create this image and to get this message out of mercy. And he is sad that people don't trust him and don't realize what his goodness and mercy is, or that anybody, no matter how much they sin, no matter how much the weight of sin is upon them, that he's there for them, and he wants them to come and surrender, and for it to be met and to be healed and to be transformed. And it's all about the goodness and the mercy, and so. And I just really resonated with that, and what we've been talking about in terms of the vulnerability and the place where he meets you, and the quality of his love being mercy. I think it's just that's what that's all about, is in that.
That the rituals and the church, everything only makes sense after that encounter with love. Really, without that. Nothing is as important as that. That's the first fundamental encounter. That's that love, receiving of love and mercy and compassion.
Yeah. And so I think you were away for one of your Gestalt training weekends that weekend. It was the weekend after Easter. So normally we would go to Mass together, but for whatever reason you were away. So fine. So then I wanted to go to that Mass for the Divine Mercy. I guess I at that point was starting to get a sense of a connection with it. And in the Mass, the Stations of the Cross are gone through, and this chaplet, these certain prayers are prayed that were also revealed to Saint Faustina and are used in this rosary, basically. And so I was in the church. There's a group of priests with the cross, and they're going to each of the Stations of the Cross through the church, and at each of the stations the Divine Mercy chaplet is being said. And it was just so powerful being in there for me. And I remember not knowing all the words and sort of feeling a little bit out of place, but then all of a sudden it was like Jesus was in my ear saying, "Don't worry about that. They're going to carry you. You just fall into this," and it was this feeling of like this, like I had fallen off a cliff or something, and I had just landed in this safety net of this congregation in this Mass on this day, and the chaplet was being said, and I was just feeling really kind of overwhelmed by it, and this real direct feeling of Jesus being there with me in that room, in that church, and him saying to me, basically surrender everything. Give me everything you're most ashamed of, everything you're most afraid of, everything you're most kind of holding back or keeping secret, or, worried about being forgiven for, or whatever. Just hand it over, hand it over, hand it over. And it was just such a clear message and experience and like command almost of like you will be forgiven, like you will kind of, not in a a coercive way, but it was just the goodness and the mercy was so clear and so strong. And the message was, I want you to trust me completely and just turn everything you've got over, you know? So I was just weeping, and people like handing me Kleenex, and, you know, kind of just like, just this amazing feeling of being welcomed and kind of held in this congregation in that experience. And then Father John, who's the prior of the or he's the abbot of the priory, I think is the word. He gave the mass, and he's a really gifted priest, and his just his teaching was so powerful and so simple and so direct and so, you know, kind of funny too, you know, and just like, I remember him saying, if you're not really just in touch with your sin and why, you know, like basically he's just saying, look, we're all messes and we're all sinners, and if you're not really connected with that, why are you here? You know, like why even come here if that's not why you're here, you know? And he talked about this whole thing of conversion, and conversion literally means to look towards the light, to turn towards the light. And there's like a light up above him, you know, in the church, and he's looking at that, and he's saying, if you're looking at your shadow and you're looking at everything that's not right and everything that's wrong and everything that's messed up, you know, that's not the point. You know, look towards Jesus, look towards the light, and that's where the work is, or that's where the, you know, the connection is. And yes, all that will wash away, but your job is to do that, you know, to look towards that. So yeah, and then I remember him saying to me as well, not Father John but Jesus, I've got you, you're mine, you know, like kind of like the job is done now, you know, like you are now here, you're now mine, I now have you, you know, was this feeling. And which was an amazing feeling. I love that feeling. But then there was also part of me of like, whoa, like what happened? You know, like hang on a second, you know. And I remember like asking him, what about meditation? And he's like, oh, that's good for you. Keep doing that. You know. So he wasn't sort of saying you have to give up Buddhism or you have to give up. I mean, Buddhism is just a word. It's just a term. But what he was basically saying is that practice is a good practice. Don't stop doing it, you know. So then after that, then I called Father John and I met with him and Father Connor, and Gosha came with me to meet with him because I said I wanted to be baptized. And they said, okay, come on in to meet, you know, and I came in to meet Father John, and it so happened that Gosha was with me because we were going out to dinner that night. And then he said, you can come this evening. And so I went in with her and we met with him, and he talked about basically the kind of process for going to baptism. And then he introduced us to Father Connor. It was lovely. It was a really lovely moment.
It was really lovely.
Yeah. And again, I just felt this sense of complete welcome and intelligence. Like these guys are really smart, but also really welcoming and funny and easygoing. And I remember walking out and Gosha saying to me, Rob, this is like a BMW. You know, like these guys are, like you can't get a better way to understand what the church is and to understand what baptism is. And so now I meet with Father Connor regularly, and I have all this reading and everything, and it's just so like thorough and so like strong and structured and detailed, and it's got like faith, but it's also just like it's on rails kind of feeling, you know, of and just the time they're giving me. I mean, like I know it's their job, you know, but still it just feels so.
The quality of experience, you know, being around them is also experiencing Jesus. Their hearts are so open and they're so present.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, so real, so human, but so good at the same, you know, at the same time. It's a real privilege, or you basically experience it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like them. Jesus meets us almost every day through other people.
Yeah.
You know? It's amazing that God has met you both in your own situations, and where it's been at the lowest points almost of your lives, and God has kind of completely taken that and transformed everybody. You know, it's really amazing to see that. And I want to thank you for coming on and sharing that testimony. And, you know, it's not sometimes, like as you said, it's obviously not just a one-time testimony. It's like a continuous everyday thing. Yeah. But I think it's amazing to share those powerful moments that I think are definitely going to inspire other people to seek and long for those encounters and those personal encounters with Christ. So yeah, like thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much. And just kind of funny that when you suggested talking about it, my first was like, oh no, it's like embarrassing or something, and then I thought, it's not about us, it's actually about Jesus. Thank you.
I was actually going to just read one quote from scripture, and it's interesting because I listened to your podcast that you did and the one that Naveen picked. So there was a point where I was asking Jesus, like, what is the essence of our relationship, Goshen Mai's relationship? Like, what do you want for us, from us, with us, etc.? And I just did literally a finger in the Bible kind of moment. And it's the same chapter that Naveen was quoting in your podcast when I listened to it. Wow. So it's John 17, but the very specific one is John 17, verse 23. So I'll just read that. So this is Jesus prays for all believers. So, well, I'll read the passage a couple before it, and then we'll hit 23. So it starts with verse 20. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent us. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. And then here's verse 23. I and them, and you and me, may they be brought to complete unity, to let the world know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me.
Wow.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.